Good morning, friends. Welcome back to the channel. I'm the GM Philosopher. Today we're talking about crafting villain backstory and motivation. Now, when you create a villain and you're going to send it at your party, be it a mid-level villain or a big bad, one of the best ways to make that villain epic, to make it awesome, to make it gripping and deep and immersive is to give it an amazing backstory and to flesh out its motivations for why it is doing what it is doing. And that is what we are going to discuss in today's episode. Now, this is actually episode 2 of a series I'm doing about creating memorable villain arcs. You can find episode number 1 of this series in this button here. But right now, I want to talk about this business of creating the backstory motivation for your villain. So I have a couple notes here. Number 1, when we want to develop a deep backstory, we want to do a couple things. Number 1, what is the origin of the villain? Okay, define the villain's background, upbringing, and formative events. You also want to align their history with the campaign world. Okay, now, first of all, I just want to tell you that you can download my Creating Memorable Villain Arcs Beyond the Big Bad, a formula guide. This is a simple PDF guide that I put together. Find the link in the description. The link is literally labeled Creating Memorable Villain Arcs Beyond the Big Bad, a formula guide. You can click on the link, download it from my Google Drive, and you'll have like a whole basically guide checklist with all these points on it. But today we're talking specifically about step 2. And so when it comes to origins, here's what I like to do. Here's what I like to think about when I'm creating villain origins. First of all, I conceptualize the villain. I kind of get an idea about what they look like. And now this is going to change a little bit. I'm talking about the very initial conceptualization. So I think about what they're going to basically look like, basically what kind of class they're going to be like. Like, are they going to be a wizard, or are they going to be like a big barbarian or a pirate, or some kind of time traveling octopus monster, a dragon? I come up with a basic idea for it. And then I think about one deeper layer of detail. Maybe it is that they are chaotic evil. Or maybe the deeper level of detail is that they have all of these religious scars on their body. Or maybe the deeper detail is that this is a dragon but is missing a horn. Or maybe it's a barbarian and he only has one eye and he wears an eye patch, and he has a whole bunch of tribal tattoos down the side of one face. And he actually has a great sword on his back, but he also has a big drum that he carries with him and he beats on it, right? So it's like we want to go one level deeper. And this is very easy for me. In fact, the reason I'm saying this is because this is when I think about villains, this is kind of where my brain automatically goes. I think, okay, there's the villain. And then there's this interesting thing about them. This is almost comes intuitively to me. And I think that this is a good next step because what it does is it helps us to pinpoint a direction to go in for when we go back in time and conceptualize the origins of this villain. By the way, do you struggle to come up with plot arcs on the fly? If so, I have the perfect tool for you. It is called My Ultimate Plot Randomizer. It is a free ebook. When you join my email list, you can download this for free. You'll get the link in your first email. It contains 4 D100 tables that will let you roll random plot arcs whenever you need them. Roll the hook, the conflict, and the conclusion, and even add wild and wacky stuff all right there. Download this, print it out, add it to your tool collection, and you will never go without another plot arc again. I give this away for free to help you create awesome plot arcs just like I do. I use this in almost every single session, and you are not going to want to miss out on this, so make sure you grab this. Now, how do we determine the origin of a villain? Well, there are 2 basic ideas that we want to solidify and that we want to get to know. Number 1 is, where did this villain come from? Just in their life, as in an existence sense. Like, where were they born? Did they have parents? What was the world situation when they were born? What climate were they in? What was their childhood like? So it's just the fundamental aspects of them as a creature or an entity in the span of their lifetime. This is like the material fundamental part of it. And this helps us to fill in some interesting details about motivations, goals, and the way they see the world. But then we have to define the villain arc. When and what and how, right? And who, right? So it's like, when did the villain arc start? How did it start? What was the motivation for it? What triggered it? And what were the ideals that drove it? And why did it become a villain arc as opposed to being a hero's arc? Because this is one interesting thing about villains. And when we talk about backstory and motivation, we have to talk about this. A villain is very much like a hero, right? In the sense that Something happened and they decided to do something about it. This is different than like the average NPC. The average NPC, like the average shopkeeper, the average, stable hand, the cook, these NPCs in the game world, they have had relatively normal lives, most of them. Probably not super extreme things have happened around them. But even if extreme things did happen around them, they kind of tended to be like, oh, that's a lot. Let's just try to get back to normal, right? The hero's path is different. The hero's path says something extreme happened. My awareness has been expanded. I cannot continue to live like I have been. I have to step out of this box. It is time to begin my hero's journey. Okay. And then they end up doing something like maybe they take up the sword of their father, they take up the armor of their mother, and they leave the little village with all of the money in their pocket. They buy a horse and they basically bet it all on the idea that they must become something different. The surviving is no longer an option for them. They have to overcome survival. They have to cross that event horizon into becoming a hero, into succeeding in a bigger way, on a bigger playing field, in a bigger world. This is the hero's journey, the hero's arc. And there's usually a big challenge or conflict or goal. They're going to come against many challenges and they're going to have many conflicts and goals. But what's going to happen is they are going to probably at some point reach sort of a destiny point or a point of fate in their journey where they will see, if you interpret it this way, see the challenge they were born for, the challenge they were crafted for by the gods, or, maybe just the challenge that they are best suited to help fight, or maybe in some cases the challenge that they take up because they look around and there is nobody else even remotely close to being as up to the task as them. So they think, if not me, then who? And then they go and they do it. This is the hero's arc. So how is the villain arc different than this? Okay. A villain goes on a very similar path. In fact, the villain arc and the hero's arc are almost the same in terms of archetypes, but you flip them on their moral heads. Okay. A lot of times the hero's arc is characterized by some measure of selflessness and good. Right now, I realize that I'm saying this and I'm speaking through a filter of morality here that we generally assume to be correct as humans. As a general rule, as humans, we would tend to say, well, at the very least, we should try to do as little harm to others as possible and to uphold the good as much as we can. And we should try to make life better for as many as possible. And that we should try to, at the very least, avoid doing a lot of harm, or at least we should do a very minimal amount of harm, the most minimal amount we can, while striving to achieve our goals. And this is going to set us above the neutral line as a net good or net moral arc of life and action. Okay, the villain says, forget that. We're casting aside the moral line. Now, there are some exceptions to this, and villains do have a sense of morality too, and it depends on their alignment, right? But for the most part, they say, no, forget the moral line. We're throwing that away. We have a goal. We have motivations. We have desires. And guess what? It's also time for us to stop just surviving. It's time for us to sell everything we have, take up the sword of our father, the armor of our mother, gonna sell everything we have to buy our horse, and we're going to leave town. And guess what? We're done. We're embarking on revenge. We're embarking on vengeance. Justice isn't being done by these moral people in the way that I think it needs to be done. I'm going to do justice my way. I'm going to see right done. What is right? Well, for the villain, right is not necessarily defined by the moral status quo. Right is defined by their personal desires. And so we have this, there's a bent of selfishness. There's a bent of, no, I am right. Whoever doesn't agree with me is wrong. Hey, Real quick, are you tired of rolling the same old dungeon loot using these same old methods time after time, game after game? Well, I have a solution for you. This is how I roll all of my dungeon loot now. It's a book I created called The Ultimate Dungeon Loot Randomizer. This book contains 10 massive D100 tables full of awesome dungeon loot. Roll on a table for mundane items, slightly magical dungeon items, mundane weapons and armor, magical weapons and armor, individual pieces of treasure, magic scrolls, potions and elixirs, cursed items, forgotten wonders and otherworldly relics, and even full chests of treasure and loot. This book is now available on my Blurb bookstore in 3 different versions. There's a hardcover option, a softcover option that's more affordable, and a super affordable digital ebook option. It's even system agnostic, meaning you can use it with any fantasy TTRPG system, and you can just adapt it to the rule set you're using. Link is in the description. Don't miss out. Grab it today. The moral line sits right here in my soul. And my journey is going to be committed to that moral value system and framework. So this is what makes a villain different than a hero. But as far as the steps go and as far as the arc goes, it's actually not much different. The phases are the same, but the morality is flipped on its head and the value system is different. The hero and the villain value much different things. So when you are seeking to create memorable villain arcs and you're using backstory and motivation to do this, then it's really important to get clear about a few things. And this is why the origin of the creature and the villain arc of the creature are 2 important things to understand. You really want to get clear on these things. You want to get clear on what their life was like, which will determine like a baseline value structure. And then you want to figure out how their villain arc started. This will allow you to dictate how their baseline framework was changed as a result of that and what their value structures are now, because some of their foundational structures may still exist, but they may have changed some of them. For example, you might have a demon who is just bloodlusted. They just want to destroy, and they do it because they get pleasure from it. This might be a chaotic, evil creature. But then you might have an evil samurai who grew up in a world of law and order, but they saw people use this law to abuse the system, hiding behind the honor of the people who would oppose them by being kind of sneaky and underhanded. The morally righteous may say, oh, they have maneuvered against us within our own code. We will not break our code. We will bide our time and wait. And when they make a mistake, we shall strike. But then this evil samurai may say, who's maybe lawful evil, might say, you know what? I am done having my code used to protect these people who are doing wrong. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep the elements of my code that I believe are valuable, but I'm going to get rid of the ones that keep me from being able to exact vengeance or justice on those who I believe deserve it. Right. So this is the difference between like a chaotic evil villain and like a lawful evil villain. Right. So it's really important to establish the motivations and goals. And this starts with the backstory and it starts with the villain arc. Okay. So these are the 2 things you want to figure out. And then you want to figure out the motivations and the goals. And you also want to figure out how to make the villain relatable and complicated. Okay. See, antagonists, the regular bad guys like the city guard who attacks you, the robber who's trying to rob you. In TTRPGs, these characters, almost like, evil NPCs, they're not incredibly complicated. They might be complicated to a point, and if you explore deeper, you will find complication. But the complexity isn't an implicit on display feature of that NPC. But a villain is different. A mid-level villain or a big bad or a boss, right? This type of villain, the complexity will be on display, as will the relatability. And there's reasons for this. There's 2 big reasons for this. Number 1, Making the villain relatable adds emotional impact to the character's involvement with that villain. And then two, adding complexity, making them obviously complex and putting that in front of the characters will challenge them. It'll challenge them morally. It may challenge them ethically. It may challenge their willpower, right? And it may challenge their whole value system. And there's a point to where if like a really good villain, and I think that one really good example of this was Thanos from the Marvel movies. Thanos had this idea to wipe out half of all sentient life so that we would have basically our resources would go twice as far. This would solve a lot of problems. Now, this challenges a lot of ideas, right? So it's obvious, like Thanos talking about a massive destruction of life, but at the same time, he is motivated to reduce suffering for those who remain alive, right? So it's a morally gray scheme, at least in certain parts of the scheme. But depending on what alignment the villains are, and then what alignment your player characters are, that complexity can really challenge the players. It might make them think, man, he's not so wrong if he would just change one or two things. So that's another thing, is that this might lead your characters to think, do we really have to fight him? Because we almost agree with him. What if we could talk him into changing one part of his plan? Or what if we could talk her into doing these two things she's talking about? But if she would just skip this one part, we could get on board with it, actually. This person is like two steps removed from being just like us in most aspects, right? If you can make your villain complex and relatable in that sense, to where you can get your characters thinking about those things, that's going to really amp up the memorability and the impact of that villain in your campaign. So anyway, there you go. That's going to complete my basically talk assessment of step 2 in my creating memorable villain arcs beyond the big bad formula guide. You can download that for free, once again, down in the description. But hey, listen, developing awesome big bads, awesome villains, memorable villains is a key part to making every campaign awesome. And I hope that this has helped you to add some spice to your next villain, help to make them awesome in a way that your players will love, or maybe love to hate, which will make them talk about that big bad for years and years to come and make it very memorable. So thank you so much for coming back and watching another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm here every single day creating videos about the best game in the world, D&D. So I'll see you awesome people on the next one.